we're here to talk a little bit about kind of brand purpose and how that's manifesting in across digital commerce. And it definitely won't be the first time today, guys, that you will hear about, you know, the growth of e-commerce. Andrew spoke about it earlier, and the fact that it's been growing year on year. And last year, of course, was no different. The pandemic influenced e-commerce sales, increasing sales by 27%. But actually, where we shop isn't the only thing that's changed because of the pandemic. I think what's been really, really interesting is also how we shop and what we value. And through the pandemic, of course, we've seen kind of loved ones get a bit ill. We've seen friends being furloughed. We've seen colleagues kind of losing their jobs. We've also clapped for key workers in the NHS. We've lent in to help and support the most vulnerable of our society. And I genuinely believe that that's really shaped kind of what people now are expecting from the world around them. And so I kind of wanted to talk about that with lovely Claire Hennah, who's joining me today. Claire is the Global Vice President for Digital Commerce over at Unilever. She's been there for just over 4 years, and she's responsible for digital commerce strategy, execution, and global capability building. Prior to that role, she's led business change over at Selfridges and was the head of marketing for a startup at Virgin Atlantic and Hearst Digital. Claire, welcome. Thank you for joining me today.
Thank you so much, Debbie. Thanks everyone for having me here.
So I guess to kick the conversation off, I'd love to hear more about your role, some of the opportunities and challenges you're seeing in the e-commerce space, and what you think are some of the factors behind that.
Well, firstly, I know that you probably expected me to say this, but it's a really exciting time to work in digital commerce. So, and I think last year, definitely a byproduct of that, but I think a very, very exciting and dynamic space. I would probably say there's 4 key areas that we're seeing over the last couple of years, and I'll talk in a little bit more detail on those. I think the first one is definitely the channel shift. You know, certainly, and I'm very fortunate because I get to work with all markets around the world and seeing how these trends change over time. But take a market like the US. Literally in 2 months, we saw a decade worth of penetration gains. Markets like the UK, we saw 9 years of share gains happen in a couple of months. So that kind of shift happened ever so quickly. And I'm sure that lots of people saw that around the world and in the businesses. So I think that shift is definitely here. But what we're seeing, even at the moment, you know, there's different parts of the world that are going through different spikes of demand with COVID. Yes, when retail opens again, you see it shift back. Then you see these spikes of demand increase again when you're going into periods of it. But there definitely is a consistency now. We're not going to go back to pre-COVID levels where the penetration was low. But this sense of us shopping over channels and omni-shopping is here and it's now, I think is very prevalent. It is just part now, as part of the habits that now we're going through as consumers. So I think there's that channel shift. The second area that I would say that we see is definitely consumer shifts as well. It's not just about you and I shopping online, that probably quite mature and we like shopping for clothes online. But we're seeing a younger generation, but equally we're seeing boomers now. My mum was shopping for groceries online for the first time in the pandemic, and she loves shopping in her local Sainsbury's. So for her, it was quite a transition to do that part of her shopping online. So we're seeing that, but I think blending with new models like social commerce, quick commerce models that are really setting the pace and convenience. I mean, I've recently bought from Katir. Don't know if people have bought through them, but literally in 6 minutes, it came to my door. And it's really setting that pace of convenience. So consumer shifts and their expectations. I think the third area is what we call customers, what you would probably know as retailers. When you look at market value, 4 of the 5 biggest retailers in the world are digital commerce first businesses. And that real convergence between media and commerce is very prevalent, and particularly when you see in markets like China, where Alibaba, the system's so integrated, retail, entertainment and payment, everything very well integrated. And then the final area I'd probably say that we're seeing is that huge competition. It's fragmented. the ability to be able to suddenly sell your brand online is easier than ever. So the route to market is very fluid for people. So I think we see those 4 areas, and I think in terms of how we're responding to that, it has to be the end-to-end ecosystem. You know, it's not just content, it's not just product, it's about supply. So we're really looking at the end-to-end ecosystem of how we need to adapt and change or design for. But I can talk a little bit more about that as we go on.
I love that you mentioned your mum shopping online. My mum ordered from Get Here and was just absolutely in love with it. I was actually very, very impressed. So yes, mum seems to be the new cohort of online purchasers, I guess.
Yeah.
So I want to talk a little bit more about kind of e-commerce, global e-commerce.
Yeah.
It weighed in, I think, at $876 billion in the first quarter of this year. So we've spoken about, you know, that channel shift that you mentioned. How important is e-commerce to Unilever, and what role does it play in the wider kind of commerce landscape?
I mean, we talk in Unilever about being future fit for the channels of the future, right? So it's grown in huge importance for us. So it is one of our strategic priorities. When we finished the end of last year, about 9% of our business came through digital commerce. The first half of this year is 11%. So you can see that real shift happening. But I think it's quite a broad term. So I would also say that you need to break it down. For us, we talk about business to consumer in 4 key areas. We talk about how we're going to be able to succeed in pure play or marketplace, in omnichannel, which is traditionally our stronghold, in D2C, and also then new revenue streams like the Katirs, the social commerce opportunities. And then we've also got a really big and thriving business to business commerce component. And the recipe to succeeding in all of those channels is slightly different. So a couple of examples. So in pure play, it's very important for us to be able to solve, particularly with our core mass portfolio, things like value density. If you make the product lighter, it's cheaper to ship it. Yeah. But in omnichannel, you need to think about new modalities and how people shop. So curbside pickup in the US has slightly different dynamics of how you might design the product. Or click and collect, you know, so there are different dynamics in how we might collaborate with retailers to be able to make that recipe win for us. In D2C, it might be more of our acquired brands that play a deeper role in how we, you know, particularly make that channel work for us.
And I love everything that you're saying around how e-commerce isn't just one thing, right? No. It's a myriad of services, you know, channels, etc., and requires different disciplines, right, to win in that space. Which area within e-commerce do you think is growing, especially for Unilever, and what do you think is fueling that growth?
I mean, you know, and I know it's easy for me to say, but I actually think growth is coming from so many different areas. So if you just take a market like China, which is our most mature, in the first half of last year, this year, we've seen double-digit growth. So, and it's the most mature market that we have. You know, nearly 50% of our business is in digital commerce. So still growing really rapidly. And if only 30% of the world population is shopping online right now, you can see that the huge opportunity ahead of us. But I think there's probably a couple of areas that, you know, I would call out. I think, you know, basic one-on-one execution is really, really important. Stock availability, particularly in these times, is very, very critical to get right. Having your product available anytime, anywhere, at consumers' fingertips is just really, really important. So you need to make sure you've got the right supply. And that is very challenging given the current COVID situation and spikes in consumer demand. But then there's also about getting the product dynamics right. You know, what we might have designed for a physical shelf before might not work when you suddenly put it in a delivery van. And, you know, we know that delivery drivers, maybe if you're not in, have a habit of chucking it over your garden fence. So you need to withstand the route to market. So there's also different things that we've been having to think about. Is that product right to fit in a box that's going to go through that type of transit? So there are many different dynamics. I think definitely getting the product right, availability, and then of course, you know, the content, the storytelling that you need to do to be able to, at that very point of purchase, be able to convey the right product dynamics that's going to convince somebody to buy it.
And that's really important, right? talking about and thinking about what that product narrative and brand narrative is. And when I started this conversation, I talked about, shoppers changing needs and wants from brands and retailers, and actually how they care more so about brand purpose now and brand value. I learned recently that there are 27 PETA-approved Unilever brands that have gone behind the fight to save, cruelty-free cosmetics. Apparently, there is a threat in the EU to kind of on the ban of testing on animals. Why are initiatives like that so important to Unilever, and why do you think they're important to kind of the end consumer? And how are you seeing that kind of being communicated throughout digital commerce?
Well, our North Star as a company is to make sustainable living commonplace, right? So, and that has many different dynamics to it. But I guess the important point of those communication touch points is thinking about it being at the right touch points. We're very fluid with how we receive information, how we absorb it. And you have to think about the shopper and what are the dynamics of what they're going through. So me ordering a grocery order that I've done the same order every week, I just go to my favourites and relist it, and I don't particularly look at a lot of content. But if I'm shopping for a new skincare product, I want to know the dynamics of what's in the product. Is it vegan free? And a lot of information. So the how-tos becomes really important. The iconography, so I can easily understand that it hasn't been tested on animals, is really important. Equally, again, we've got some of our R&D teams doing live selling, knowledge-based selling we call it, where they're so expert at what is in the product. People want to hear that. But selling skincare is very different from selling laundry, as you would know. But equally, the dynamics and the factors, when you're seeing big growth trends like naturals, you need to be able to convey that at the point of sale. But it needs to be done in a way that is right. If you're suddenly then overly talking about one dynamic when I just want to buy the product, you can end up also losing people. So it has to be a really healthy balance, and understanding when is the right time to be talking about purpose in a shopper journey as well. Yeah,
it's super interesting. I think one of the other trends that I've been really interested in seeing is the upward rise of impulse spending, right? So Britain spend, I think, 3 billion a month on impulse spending. I'm not going to say I contribute to any of that. I do, subtext. And in America, we've seen a 51% increase in impulse buying as well. So not only do we have that upward trend of buying in the moment, added on the layer of the increase in e-commerce sales, many more of us, to your point, are being inspired online and converting online within kind of milli-moments. How are you working with your retailers then to talk about your brand's purpose, to talk about values, and also spaces and places that you don't actually own?
Yeah, and it really is different around the brand and the collaboration and the retailer. I mean, what's going to be right for that activation of purpose as well. So a couple of examples. So we work with Superdrug, we have done for the last couple of years around Pride, and we have done that with a couple of our brands, Lynx, Impulse, that you would know in the UK. And that some of it's product activation, some of it's stories and how we might talk about that on social media, right through to the physical event at Pride with a float. And of course, we haven't been able to do that for a couple of years. And so that's a real chance for us to be able to talk about what we might be doing to support particular purposes and the Rainbow Trust there. But we're doing it in tandem because actually we've got a mutual purpose to get behind that together. Otherwise, I think, consumers see it as greenwashing, it might be, or, not true values, and they're just trying to jump on the bandwagon. So I think it's really important that you've got a shared values system when you do these types of collaborations. We're also working, Shopee, a retailer across Southeast Asia, we're working, we've launched an initiative called Clean Futures within home care, where we're reducing our emissions target, and we're working with them activating campaigns, but it's a multi-year campaign. We're also looking at the complete supply chain. So it's really important that you think about purpose being a continuous journey when you do these types of collaborations, because otherwise consumers don't believe and trust in it.
No, you're absolutely right. I think consumers now are being a lot more wary and a lot more cynical around how brands are communicating kind of what they do and how they do it, and really looking under the bonnet, to your point, into the supply chain, looking at kind of workers' rights and areas of ethics right across businesses. So it's really brilliant to hear that kind of you're really thinking about that at Unilever. So I guess moving on, some of the other data that we've seen most recently is that 24% of shoppers are willing to spend more. You spoke about kind of the laundry category, willing to spend more on sustainable, ethically kind of produced products. 24% of shoppers are plan to spend more from Black-owned businesses. And again, I was so pleased to learn that Unilever, Dove Baby, is investing over $250,000 into the Black Birthing Equity Fund, helping to cover the costs of doula services. Thought was really phenomenal, really helping kind of the community. Can you talk a bit about kind of that initiative and other initiatives where you're seeing that type of investment across your Unilever brands?
Yeah, I mean, I think anyone that would have listened to Alan, our CEO, would have really talked about the importance of purpose in brand. And, for us, dependent on that brand, it needs to be the right purpose that also consumers believe in. And I think, as I've kind of talked about how we might activate and collaborate with partners is really, really important, because otherwise consumers just distrust what you're trying to achieve. I mean, we did an initiative with with Amazon last year, where we worked with their Climate Pledge Friendly initiative that they launched, which basically is how they're going to achieve net zero emissions in 2040. And they're starting to talk about how do you make it easier for a shopper to find sustainable products. And we worked with our brand seventh generation, and we launched with them a new SKU, which was all focused around 60% reduction in plastic, 50% reduction in water, than our usual detergent. And it fit, I guess, for us, we see a lot of people searching online for more natural alternatives. So it meet the consumer needs, but equally, Amazon were able to, because they were also launching the same, initiative around how do we make it more easier for people to shop sustainable products. We collaborated with them, and now we've got that in place with over 500 SKUs across the US and the UK. But I think, you do have to go in with a conscious mind that the partner needs to be the right fit. And if you've got certain standards as a company, who you're collaborating with, are they going to be able to follow that through too? Because as you were just kind of alluding to, the consumer looks at every component now. So it's really, really important to say that you don't end up kind of with woke claims, really.
Yeah, I completely agree. I also think it's really interesting what you were saying around how shoppers now are actually shopping sustainability creds and ethical credentials, maybe even more so than product need or product benefit, right? And so what we're definitely seeing is that change in user experience in kind of retailer ecosystems, and it's really great to see how you're partnering with customers in order to achieve that as well. So I guess finally, just to wrap up, you're doing so many great things and you've got such responsibility on your shoulders, really helping markets make the most of e-commerce and the opportunities of e-commerce. So the big question, what's the future? What's the future for brand, purpose and values at Unilever and the future of digital commerce?
Oh gosh,
I know.
I think that was a question asked a little bit earlier in a couple of the sessions, and gosh, if we had crystal balls, we probably would be sitting here, Debbie, would we? We'd be on some island somewhere. But I think, there probably are a few areas and that we're certainly seeing become table stakes. The really big switch to, as you're facing into a more algorithmic future, you need to invest in automation, artificial intelligence, to be able to make sure your brand appears in search, etc. Obviously, it comes with that an investment, also cultural change, to be able to deal with that. And the complexities, I've talked to you about different models, different retailers, each one of them has a different recipe. So being able to deal with the fragmentation, the change, the needs, you need to be able to invest in tech as a core enabler for you. So that is definitely an area. I think, and also if you're talking about, I might really be invested in shopping for sustainable product, but somebody else might have completely different need state. So only really to be able to serve all their needs and bring in that personalization, we have to invest in automation and artificial intelligence to be able to do that. Serving consumer needs in the best way has to be through that. I think that we'll see a continuation of having to design for this particular route to market that we've got in all these different channels. So product design becomes really important, packaging becomes really important. I think there's also, as more people start to shop online, sustainability and the sustainability of the channel will also be called into question. And we're starting to look at a lot of different commitments there. So from packaging, but right through to, and I'm sure that a lot of people would have seen it, having electric vehicles on the road to bring down your carbon emissions, but that's only one component. So that end-to-end system to be able to fuel the growth here becomes really important, because it probably could well be that blue planet moment where we saw lots of plastic in the ocean and you're suddenly seeing cardboard piling up. So I think that responsibility as this channel grows is going to really become very, very important. And of course, the diversification of models, and again, as I said before, seeing what's happening in other markets, the social commerce trend coming out of China is now very evident across our Southeast Asia markets. Social commerce in the West is quite different at the moment. It's not as integrated as an ecosystem as we're seeing in the East. So I think even though people say social commerce, it's not truly what we're seeing in the West yet from what we can see in China and markets in Southeast Asia. So I think we'll continue to see really big developments happen in that space. And I definitely think the quick commerce model, particularly with retailers that maybe are facing quite a challenging how to make the last mile delivery profitable for them, I would say that would probably be another area.
Claire, thank you so much. I think what's really interesting, what I've loved learning is, hearing Chloe Taylor speak earlier around the business that she set up and that focus on vegan products and making sure that she's selling kind of certified vegan products, to see how Unilever are also tapping into, brand and purpose, but at scale and globally has been, phenomenal to witness up until now. Thank you for everything that you're doing in that space and really pushing the envelope there. Thank you for joining me today.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.